For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global and to our occasional series on Books Corner. My name is Surya Gangadharan. Hi, we have an interesting book for you this evening. West Asia at War, Repression, Resistance and Great Power Gains. This is by Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, who was our envoy in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Ambassador, welcome. Glad to have you. Great read, this book.
Thank you very much.
So I've been focusing on a lot of this book is about history, the era of colonialism, Arab nationalism, the Gulf Wars, and so on. I'm actually reading this book back to front, sir, because it is more current. And I focused really on two chapters that I found very interesting in the contemporary context. That is the malaise affecting the Arab world and the role of India. So, with that, I'd like to begin, sir, with my first lot of questions. This region has seen tremendous conflict over the last many, many years. And even today in Yemen, you have war, you have instability in Syria and Iraq. So, obviously, there is a malaise here. Could you tell us more about this malaise?
The main point to be noted about the region, and particularly about the countries of the Gulf, is that they are inherently insecure. They were set up as sovereign states by the retreating British Empire, but the states that emerge from this arrangement, from this effort, are not stable, nor are they secure. Therefore, they are constantly dependent on the former colonial dominant power in the region, in this case, the British. And that is how it has been. That means on their own, they are incapable of looking after themselves. Initially, they turned to the British. Then, as the British retreated from the region from the 1970s, the British were replaced by the Americans. So there has been a constant affiliation, a security affiliation of the region with the Americans. There are constantly developments in the region that enhance the insecurity of the countries concerned. Now, take for example Saudi Arabia, a very major country, the world's largest. It has the world's largest reserves of oil. It is also the guardian of the two holy sites of Islam, but it has only 20 million people, and therefore obviously incapable of looking after itself, and it has constantly to be worried about earlier with the aggressive efforts of Saddam Hussein when he ruled Iraq, and then of course after that you have this huge presence of the Iranians. Saudi Arabia has sought security overall from the Americans, but has also attempted to maintain a balance of power in the region vis-a-vis Iran. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, the Saudis had turned to the Egyptians and was therefore able to maintain a balance of power. The nexus between Riyadh and Cairo gave a balance of power to the region. But with the fall of Hosni Mubarak in 2011, in the context of the Arab Spring, once again Saudi Arabia felt very insecure. It was not sure to what extent the Americans would come to their assistance. At that stage, they decided to take matters into their own hands and take certain initiatives in the region in order to indicate to the Iranians that they would be under pressure, that the Saudis would put them under pressure. And this is how the Syrian conflict began. The Syrian conflict is an effort on the part of the Saudis to overthrow the existing regime on the basis that it is a Shia regime, and to replace it with a Sunni majority regime, so that Syria would then detach itself from the Iranians and come back into the Arab mainstream, and then in this way restore the balance of power in the region. Similarly, with regard to Yemen, there was instability in Yemen not connected with Iran at that time, but the Saudis were concerned that the Houthis, who are about 40% in United Yemen, but a Shia community, that they are surrogate role players in the region, in the country of the Iranian interest. And as a result, Saudi Arabia initiated a military conflict against the Houthis, thinking that it would be over in a few weeks, that the massive bombardment that they would inflict upon them, it would ensure that the country would come into their lap. Both these initiatives have failed. Military initiatives have failed. And despite the fact that the Iranians are under sanctions, they have come out strategically, they seem to have come out better as compared to the Saudis in these two conflicts. The point to be noted is the countries are insecure. They are not always certain of the support that they will enjoy from the Americans. They attempt to take certain initiatives at home within the region itself, and many of these misfire.
And would you say the search for the breaking the ice with Israel is part of the search for some kind of security?
Well, initially, when the Saudis were started engaging with the Israelis, it was in the context of the nuclear agreement that the Obama administration had initiated. The two countries that were both hostile to the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as the
Yeah.
nuclear agreement is called, they thought that they could unite their efforts to subvert the agreement in Washington and in the US in general. And that is where they started working together, though they had no diplomatic ties. And that effort obviously failed. But we know that clandestine connections between the kingdom and the Israelis, possibly at the intelligence and military levels, is taking place, but there is no diplomatic relationship. The normalization that you have seen recently is really led by the UAE. UAE is a much smaller country, much less strategically significant, but it took this initiative, I believe, in an electoral context. Both
Mhm.
Donald Trump and Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, were looking extremely vulnerable at that time. Trump was looking at very poor polls, and there was an indication that he might lose. He really had no diplomatic achievement that he could indicate to his electorate that this is what I have got for you.
Yeah.
So he desperately needed a major achievement. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, he was facing all these charges of corruption, breach of trust, gross misconduct, etc. And he wasn't looking good at all either. The UAE thought that this is a golden opportunity to re engage with both these beleaguered leaders. And the game plan was that even if these two lose, there will be sections of the American political establishment and the Israeli establishment who will appreciate this gesture. And while the two people whom they were seeking to support have both been defeated and are moved out of the political scenario, at least for the time being, the UAE believes that they haven't done badly. It is not, I don't think it has much of a strategic value. I doubt that, because the Israelis are fully capable of looking after their interests. They don't
Yeah.
need the Emirati relationship. I think it is largely for domestic purposes. Both Netanyahu and now Naftali Bennett are telling their people that, look, we can make headway with the Arabs without doing anything for the Palestinians. This has
Yeah.
been the Israeli approach in the region consistently, even when they had reached out to the Egyptians and then the Jordanian. They always want to have a relationship without doing anything for the Palestinians. Like recently, I asked an Israeli interlocutor that, look, you send delegations to Casablanca and to Rabat. You are sending delegations to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. You also went to Sharm el Sheikh. Why are you not able to go 5 kilometers from Jerusalem and talk
Hmm.
to the people in the West Bank? They need this
Hmm.
interlocution much more, because until you settle with the Palestinians on terms that the two of you agree with, you are not going to have peace in the region, whatever other normalization that you might pursue. But until the Israelis change their approach, we are not going to see the kind of stability the region desperately needs.
Now, you have talked about the US distancing itself from the West Asia, when for long the US has been the security guarantor for the Saudis and so many others. So, why is this happening? And does it account for the enhanced profile of China and Russia?
Surya, there has been a steady fatigue in the US with regard to West Asia. It didn't start recently. It began initially with Bush. Bush
Yeah.
didn't want to have much to do with the region. And it continued with Obama, and it went on with Trump, and then, of course, it has gone into Biden. The West, just as much as the Americans are fed up with West Asia, they are fatigued by West Asia. I would say to you the opposite is also true. The West Asians are also fatigued with the Americans. So there is a mutual fatigue. The reason is that the Americans are deeply engaged with the region, but the foundations of this engagement are fundamentally flawed. The Americans are engaged largely to subserve the interests of the Israelis. They have allies in West Asia, but at the end of the day, much of their policy approaches to the region have been influenced by the Israelis and their lobby in Washington and other parts of the US. That is the first thing. The second thing is that the Americans, and it must be admitted very frankly, have never actually made an effort to understand the region, its history, its politics, its economics, its culture, its religion, and therefore the kind of diplomatic engagement, a substantial diplomatic engagement that the Americans should have had with different players in the region has not taken place. The third point, I will say that the Americans have this extraordinary propensity to go to war, where diplomacy is the instrument that would be most effective. They go immediately. Whatever happens, they go to war. And therefore, military interventions have shaped American approach to the region. And very rarely have these military interventions been properly planned. Very rarely has been there is an understanding of what is the game plan, where do they want to go, nor have they deployed adequate assets, nor is there a time frame for their military adventure, and they do not know at what stage they will declare victory and go away. The last point I will make in this context is that just as much as the Americans are irrationally and totally committed to the interests of the state of Israel, they are similarly extremely hostile to Iran, the Islamic Republic. And this is now a very major domestic issue. Israel and Iran, one as an ally and the other as a hate object, are both matters of American domestic politics and are not foreign policy. And I would say to you that this is the principal source of the Americans not getting any initiative of theirs right. Now, when Biden came in, he indicated he wants to disengage, just as Obama had done earlier and as Bush had done. But you can't escape. You have, because as I mentioned to you, Israel and Iran are domestic issues. Price of oil is a domestic issue,
Yeah.
and therefore, even if you desperately wish that you didn't have anything to do with the region, the commitments that you are involved with domestically, for example, with regard to Israel, whether Biden wants to have a balanced policy approach or not, he just cannot because of the Israel lobby in the United States. Again, you have with regard to Iran, you have the nuclear agreement. The Iranians say you remove the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, from the terrorist list on which they were put gratuitously by Donald
Yeah.
Trump. Biden
Yeah.
doesn't have that kind of political capacity because he's facing elections in November. Therefore, I am afraid, as of now, that you might actually find that Biden cannot deliver the agreement that he had said he would do. It would be a priority as far as he was concerned.
So, does that account for the return of Russia, the rise of China?
I would not straight away say that the two are linked because the Americans, while they have wanted to disengage, haven't actually done that. I think that the Chinese have made steady progress in the region. They are a part of the region. They share borders with Central Asia, Afghanistan, etc. And they were initially concerned about the emergence of radicalism, Islamic
Mhm.
radicalism, and they were concerned that this might infect some of their own Muslim community. That is how they originally came in. In the 1990s, they found that as their growth rates were going high, they were no longer self sufficient as far as oil is concerned, and they became importers of oil from West Asia, particularly the Gulf countries. And while they have diversified their sources and also are able to get oil from Russia and from Central Asia, their dependence on the Gulf is quite significant. It is over 60%. So
Mhm.
60% of imported oil comes from the Gulf. So that is how they came in. The third factor was their participation in the region's projects. They started executing very high value and quite sophisticated infrastructure projects. At one time, they had about 120 projects worth about $150 billion. The size of their community has expanded. And the final factor, the most important factor today, is the Belt and Road Initiative. Initiated in 2013, it gives West Asia a very major place in the initiative. Having said
Mhm.
all this, the Chinese have never articulated a political posture as far as the region is concerned. They've confined themselves to talking about energy, economic and trade cooperation, and participation in projects and the Belt and Road. They have
Mhm.
not taken sides in regional disputes. They have not initiated anything diplomatically to promote peace and stability, what have you. The Russian game plan has been slightly different, though there is a degree of coordination today. Russians have focused on the political agenda and they came into the region from Syria.
Mhm.
When the Saudis,
Absolutely.
backed by Western allies, were trying to obtain regime change in Syria from the early part of the second decade, the Russians found that this is not acceptable. After the debacle of Libya, they intervened militarily in Syria and were able to ensure that regime change was foiled. Having got in, they then adopted a diplomatic role. Given the chaos of the Trump administration, Vladimir Putin looked like a statesman, a
Hmm.
stable, sensible person you could talk to who said very little and delivered what he promised. Every leader of the region made a beeline for Moscow,
Yeah.
not to Washington, D.C. So, whether
Yeah.
it was Turkey or Israel or Saudi Arabia or Iran or Iraq and Cairo, all of them went to Moscow. So, this is how the two came in. Then, in the context of petroleum prices, Saudi Arabia reached out to Russia and set up OPEC Plus, and Russia brought in Central Asian producers as well. And they have coordinated with each other the production of oil as well as and managed to maintain a degree of stability with regard to oil prices for their interest. So, this is the way they came in. Today, both of them are very well placed. I would say to you that the chaos and the anarchy that accompanied the Trump administration
Hmm.
actually boosted the status of these two countries. And therefore, you notice something quite extraordinary. In the context of the Ukraine conflict, other than Kuwait, not a single country in West Asia has
Yeah.
supported the Americans, whether
Absolutely.
it
Hmm.
is the UAE in the Security Council
Hmm.
or making any statement in support of the Americans or disengaging from Russia or making any nasty remarks about the Russian military adventure. None of them, not one of them. This
Hmm.
is the sea change. So there is something that the what the Americans have done is not that they have engaged disengaged. they have lost credibility.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
crucial. That it happened during the period of Donald Trump, where he was an aggressive presence in the region, taking initiatives on the basis of tweets at midnight, but actually with very low credibility.
Yeah.
Absent the heavy hand of the Americans, the Turks are talking to Saudi Arabia and to Egypt and to the UAE. Saudi Arabia and Iran are engaged with
Absolutely.
each other, and they had their fifth round of dialogue in a year just a few days ago. Therefore, you are looking at a region, I would call it the region has come of age,
Hmm.
that they are today capable of taking independent decisions in regard to their security, building up alliances on the basis of their understanding of their interests, and maintaining relationship with very diverse peoples. For example, the UAE is in touch with Iran and with Turkey and has normalized relations with the Israelis.
Hmm.
This is the kind of scenario that you see today. Where it
Hmm.
will go and how it will pan out remains to be seen. But the fact is, the region today looks very different from what it was just a few years ago.
Fascinating. So let's come to India now. Since we're talking about all these guys, let's finally come to India. And you're right. Neither India nor any of its partners in the region have made any effort to address the various security issues that bedevil their shared security space. Now, what are these issues and why is this so?
The Indian approach to West Asia has been a matter of persistent disappointment to me. I thought that once the Arab Spring agitations had occurred and the region has gone into turmoil, four major leaders had collapsed, and the region was on the face of looking at confrontation and possibly conflagration. At that time, I believed that India had the golden opportunity of playing a substantial role, diplomatic role, to promote dialogue between estranged neighbors. Why did I believe that? I felt that the Americans, having lost credibility and indicating that they wanted to disengage, there was room for new players. Can you imagine anyone better placed than India? India has had a relationship with this region for 5,000 years. And
Yeah.
it's an uninterrupted relationship. It's a relationship of extraordinary comfort and cordiality. We have also had situations where you have such a large number of people living there. And why is that? Because of the genuine, a genuine comfort with regard to
Yeah.
the Indian presence. As I said, India's relationship is has energy content, economic and trade content, logistical connectivity projects are envisaged, and the presence of 8.5 million people. India also has the reputation of not being, it was not interventionist in its
Hmm.
approach. It never told any country what kind, it was not prescriptive with regard to domestic politics, it was not hegemonic, and it was not intrusive. These are very positive qualities. And once Mr. Modi came in and he prioritized the relationship with the Gulf from 2015 onward, look at every joint statement. Every joint statement speaks of a strategic partnership on the one hand, which encompasses cooperation in defense and intelligence and security, and speaks of cooperation to promote regional peace and stability. I want to remind you here, for instance, in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi was speaking at a BRICS summit in Brazil, he said he expressed concern about instability all the way from Afghanistan across West Asia. And he said this is a danger for India and for other countries because
Yeah.
these conflicts spill over. And he had added this very important remark: India cannot be a mute spectator in the face of this challenge. Go forward a little bit when the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, visited India. the Prime Minister and the Crown Prince wrote a joint article which appeared in every Indian newspaper and every
Yeah.
Emirati newspaper. Recall the second paragraph of that article. It said that we make this pledge that we will use our joint efforts not just to promote bilateral relations but for the regional peace and prosperity. This is our pledge to each other. Now, this is all out there. Are we to believe that these words mean nothing? I put it another way to you. Suppose during the period of Donald Trump, you will recall how close the region came to a region wide conflict.
Yeah.
You remember there was a tanker war and there was
Yeah.
the American drone was shot down, and the Americans assassinated Qasem Soleimani. 3, 4 times there were occasions when you truly feared that there would be a region wide conflagration. What would it have meant for India? It would have meant energy security would have been doomed. We get 80% of our oil from the region.
From there, yeah.
We have the highest level of trade relations, the first top three in terms of the region, in terms of products and the region. GCC is our trade partner, major source of investment for our infrastructure projects. We have logistical connectivity projects that are envisaged through Iran from Chabahar going into Afghanistan and Central Asia and Moscow. And we have 8.5 million Indians living there. Imagine this horrible situation when there is real conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Will it not happen that within the first few hours of the conflict, when there is a massive attack from Iran all across the Gulf coast, several thousand Indians would be victims?
Yeah.
So, if in India our government's heart bleeds with concern for the welfare of one person in a remote corner of the kingdom, should we not be bothered about the danger in which our own community is placed? I had then recommended, and I have recommended over several years, that India should put together a diplomatic initiative to put to see how we can bring these estranged people together. And I had argued that India is an extremely well placed nation in this regard. But what India has done, and this is my disappointment, that our traditional approach to the region, I have described it in 2 words: transactional and bilateral. And that pattern has continued, even though the objective reality is that the ground situation is not the same. It is conflictual. This kind of approach you can have when the times are good. At that time, you could rejoice in the fact that you are friendly with Iran and you're friendly with Saudi Arabia and you're friendly with Israel. What if there is real conflict between them? Are not your crucial and abiding national interests seriously jeopardized? So I had argued that we are not only well placed, there is a necessity for intervention, diplomatic. But it never
Diplomatic.
happened. It never happened. And even today, it's not happening. Today, the countries in a set of circumstances are talking to each other. But I feel that we could have and should have been players. You cannot pursue the foreign policy of another era when the era has changed. And there is now a truly a new era, new challenges. You need a new mindset for that. You can't turn to the 19th century for ideas that are relevant to the 21st century. Many of the ideas that emerge and the challenges we've never faced before. And you have to show alacrity, and you have the capacity, you have the credibility. But that is the point that I have made in the book, that we should have intervened diplomat. And I'm not saying it should be done very dramatically. Quiet diplomacy, behind the scenes diplomacy, talking to people, bringing people together, guaranteeing certain. We are well placed for that, but we didn't do any of that.
So I come to my last question, and you write here that as regional tyrants abetted by their foreign accomplices continue to accumulate the capabilities to combat resistance, the prospect of successful change across West Asia remains very remote. You're very pessimistic about the future of the region. At least the
I,
political future of the region.
I have wrestled with my conscience very strongly while writing this last paragraph. You know that no author likes to end his book, and this is a
Yeah,
550-page tome, on a
yeah,
pessimistic note. I wrote two things. Therefore, I have written two paragraphs, one after the other. One, I have celebrated the spirit of resistance. If
hmm.
you see, the subtitle of my book is very telling: repression, resistance, and great power games.
Great power games.
My
Yeah,
point is that repression from authoritarian regimes and from interventions of external role players, particularly from the West, have all the time, continuously over the last century and a half, the pattern of resistance is well established. The people have not quietly and silently accepted this resistance. There have been this repression, and they have responded with resistance. And at the second last para, I have talked about the Palestinians. That
hmm.
what have they not suffered? They have loss of their identity, loss of
Yeah,
their land, extraordinary violence upon their person. Very many of them, the families are divided. They lead lives of extraordinary privation. And they have very few supporters left in the world. Many
yeah,
of the Arab nations, some of the most Arab nations, are not particularly engaged with their interests. And
yeah.
yet, the message that I have given, and yet they have not given up. They have not given up their struggle for a single day. The last paragraph is the one that I wrestled with great difficulty,
Hmm.
because I wanted to say that in the foreseeable future things will change. But my objective understanding of the region did not allow this. And I had to say that
Hmm.
given the coercive power available with authoritarian rulers and the near total support they enjoy from the West, the likelihood of this resistance being successful is remote. That is the point. And yes, I agree with you that I am torn. On the one hand, I celebrate the resistance, the great spirit of the Arab people who will not accept the repression they are subjected to. But objectively, I also know that the authoritarian rulers and the backing that they have consistently enjoyed from the West does not as yet give these people the kind of power that is required for real change. When it will happen, I am not able to say that. I have also
Hmm.
explored in the book the prospect or possibility of change top down. You know,
Yeah, hmm.
you can have change bottom up, grassroots, like the Arab
Yeah,
Spring was an attempt from grassroots level going up. And there have been similar efforts earlier as well, when the monarchies were overthrown in the 50s and you had new rulers who came with the promise of nationalism and socialism and development. And they became authoritarian rulers
hmm.
then. And
Yeah,
then there
in
was
turn.
violence against them from a
Hmm.
radical Islam. And even that has been suppressed and crushed. So you have the pattern of authoritarianism, and almost all these authoritarian rulers enjoyed the greatest possible support in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
The Americans have been constant sponsors of such
yeah,
regimes. Therefore, people have paid a price. And I have brought out that it has not been a very easy journey for the Arabs. Look at their economic situation. Beyond the glitz of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Kuwait and a few oil rich sheikdoms, overwhelming majority of Arabs live in extraordinary penury. You also have massive corruption defining the state order. You have crony capitalism. A small number of people gobble up most of the resources of the state, and yet the people have not given up. You never feel a situation. That is why the ruler is frightened, and that is why I have argued the ruler is violent.
Ambassador Talmi is fascinating. As always, a pleasure talking to you. And to all of our viewers who are tuning into the show, check out his latest book, West Asia at War: Repression, Resistance, and Great Power Games. It's a great read. Ambassador Talmiz, thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Surya. All the best to you.
And those of you who have joined us with your comments and observations, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media and Twitter. And thank you and good night.